discussion, and you guys can ask more substantive questions about what does this mean statewide or anything that's burning that's not presentation related. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Jeff Hostetler from right here. This is Home Court Advantage for Jeff from FWRI.
Thanks, Libby. So I'm going to be talking today about population ecology and persistence of marine mammals in Florida, with focus on the Florida manatee. I'm a research scientist here in the marine mammal program at FWRI. And yeah, my background is not in marine science, it's in population ecology, but that's part of what we do, so it works out well. Population ecology, what is that? That's, first of all, what is a population? It's a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same place, usually requiring some sort of potential for reproduction between them. And what population ecology is in part the study of demography of these wildlife populations, which includes all the processes that can change the number of animals from one time period to the next, births, deaths, immigration, emigration. And then you can synthesize these demographic rates to model population dynamics and persistence. These include things like abundance, or the number of animals in the population, population growth, how it changes over time, and probably of extinction or quasi-extinction. This is in like you've got a population viability analysis or other stochastic model. You're looking at what's the probability that the population will drop to 0 animals at some time period in the future, or some other threshold that you set. So that would be quasi-extinction, probably a quasi-extinction. FWRI's marine mammal program has been in existence for over 30 years. It provides conservation managers timely information needed to protect and effectively manage the state's marine mammal resources. And there's a lot of things we work on. These include rescue and stranding response, cause of death determination, habitat use, threat assessment, species response to conservation actions, and population ecology. We focus on several species, but two of the ones we spend most of our resources on are the North Atlantic right whale and the Florida manatee. The North Atlantic right whale, which we'll be hearing more about later as well, is an endangered species with very few left in the wild. And mostly they're found in the North Atlantic. But some whales migrate each year to the southeast United States, or the calving grounds, primarily the females that are calving. And our program leads the Southeast United States Recovery Plan implementation team. And some of our published population research includes ship strike risk analysis and habitat and distribution modeling for this species. Some of our ongoing population research includes probabilities of migration and calving studies and residency patterns in the Southeast United States. So the other one, as I was saying, was the Florida manatee. This is a subspecies of the threatened West Indian manatee. Some of our published population research includes estimated abundance from 2011 to 2012. The core biological model, which is a population viability analysis for the Florida manatee that I'll be discussing in detail in a few slides. And a risk analysis framework for looking at ship strikes. Ongoing population research includes estimating abundance for other years. Ones that we're doing abundance surveys, we have done an abundance survey more recently that we're working on estimating the abundance for that. Also projecting abundances between years that the abundance survey has been done. Fractions of mortality analyses, where you look at cause of death determination that our institute has done and project that to the population. Relationships between cold events and mortality, and aging manatees carcasses from their ear bones. So both of these programs depend heavily, and a lot of other research depends heavily on the field work that we do. This includes photo ID, genetics and telemetry work, and all of these allow us to track marked individuals through time and space. So let's see this. Yeah, these are scar marks on the back of a manatee. Most of the scars that we find are from boat strikes. But because these are unique patterns, we can track the individuals as we see them again and again. And these, and what are these used for? They can be used to estimate demographic rates, as I was saying, the movement, the reproduction, and survival. Aerial surveys, we fly quite a few of those, and these can be used to estimate abundance and distribution. And carcass recoveries and necropsies can be used to estimate the fractions of mortality I was talking about, unusual mortality events, and scar acquisition rates. So the core biological model, or CBM, the goals of this analysis, this is an update that I'm going to be talking about. It's been run several times in the past. And thank you, yes, good. This update was run in this, published in this last year. And the goals of this update were to determine the status of the Florida manatee, severity of threats to the manatee, and include new information and data that hadn't been incorporated in the previous analyses. Things like the effects of the extreme cold events of 2010, 2011. A lot of parts to this analysis. These include parameter estimates, which in turn include the abundance, current abundance, survival rates, female reproductive rates, fractions of mortality, mortality effects of unusual mortality events, and carrying capacity. Another part of this is the population model itself, which is a stochastic density-dependent stage-structured population model with two sexes. And this baseline scenario structure, which is that we tried to fully account for our parametric and other uncertainty in this effort. We ran multiple scenarios as part of this. The baseline scenario represents our best expert judgment about the conditions the manatee will face over the next 30 years, or 100 years rather, and accounting for uncertainty. So it sometimes incorporates multiple scenarios within the baseline. Other scenarios represent specific hypotheses about conditions that the manatee might face. They could either be within the baseline or outside it if they're deemed unlikely to be happening, but were something we were interested in exploring anyway. A little bit more overview. Because I'll be presenting about the regions, I wanted to show you a slide of them here. There's four, we divide the state of Florida into four regions, Northwest, Southwest, Upper St. Johns River, and the Atlantic coast. And so the results, the outputs of this can be divided either into these four regions or grouped on the coastal scale, the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast, or presented statewide. And so these outputs include probability of quasi-extinction, as I mentioned earlier. This could be, this has two arbitrary aspects to it. One is the time frame you look at it in, and the other is what level of quasi-extinction threshold you look at. So because of this, we look at probability of quasi-extinction with a number of different time frames and thresholds. And I'll be presenting some of those. Another analysis we did was threats analysis, so looking at the effects of the of given threats, of how those affect the probability of quasi-extinction. If they're taken out, to how much does the probability of quasi-extinction go down from that threat being removed. Another was projected abundances, so in addition to what's the probability of dropping below a given threshold, what's the expected number in the future. And Then potential effects of emerging threats. This is the scenarios I was talking about. Some of these scenarios maybe we think are not as likely, but we want to see what would happen if those were modeled. All right, so some results. We projected that the probability of the Manatee population as a whole, the statewide, on the coastal scale, dropping below 500 adults within the next 100 years was very low, about less than 0.5%. And this is estimated low for at least 3 reasons. One is that the estimated adult survival rates are quite high. Another is that the current population size is greater than 2,500 on each coast, so it's starting high, and so it has a lot of room to, a lot of buffer there. And then the third is that the carrying capacity, this is a density-dependent model, so it has carrying capacity in it. And we believe the carrying capacity, or our experts believe the carrying capacity is much larger than the current abundance estimates in all the regions. So 3 threats contributed similar to the risk of quasi-extinction. Here's a graph of this. It's hard to make out right now, but the idea is different thresholds and lead to different probabilities of quasi-extinction. And that the baseline scenario is the highest, and then if something's similar to the baseline scenario, that means that that removing that threat had very little effect. But there's 3 threats that did have an effect on this, admittedly already low probability of quasi-extinction, and that is watercraft-related mortality, red tide mortality, and loss of warm water habitat. However, when we're projecting increases, what might happen if these threats got worse, only an increase in watercraft-related mortality had potential to substantially increase the probability of quasi-extinction at the statewide or coastal level. And I'll show you a graph of that later. Here's a graph of projected abundances by the 4 regions: the Northwest, Upper St. Johns River, Southwest, and Atlantic coast. So expected loss of warm water habitat is likely to cause a major shift in the distribution from the regions that are more, where the warm water depends more on natural springs, Northwest and Upper St. John's, to those from the Southwest and Atlantic, where it depends more on industrial warm water, which we believe will go away as power plants become obsolete. So the chances are nearly 50% that manatee populations in the Southwest and Atlantic regions will decrease from their 2011 levels, the starting levels, by at least 30% over the next century. So they're not going to increase for very long in those regions, and the fact they will probably decrease a bit. There were a large number of scenarios were examined to explore the possible effects of emerging threats or potential emerging threats. And most of them, there wasn't that much impact. The risk of quasi-extinction at the coastal scale within 100 years did not rise above 1%. The 4 exceptions were scenarios in which the rate of watercraft-related mortality increased, carrying capacity is only a fraction of the current estimate, a new chronic source of mortality emerges, or multiple threats emerge in concert. So it's just like a worst-case scenario kind of thing. And even in these scenarios, however, the risk of falling below 500 adults on the East Coast or the Gulf Coast within 100 years was less than 10%. So here's a graph of one of these scenarios, or a range of these scenarios. This is a level of watercraft threat relative to the baseline. So 1 is the baseline, and there's a probability of quasi-extinction on the y-axis here. So if you reduce it, it goes down slightly. If you increase it, it goes up a bunch. But it's still not a humongous probability of quasi-extinction. So summary, high adult survival provides the population with resilience to a variety of current and future threats. If these threats continue to be managed effectively, manatees are likely to persist on both coasts of Florida and remain an integral part of coastal Florida ecosystems throughout the 21st century at least. However, if vigilance and management is reduced, the scenarios in which manatees could face risk of decline become likely, or much more likely in some cases. So, this is, FWRI is a public agency, and our research is designed to inform conservation management. And the CBM, which is a multi-agency effort, is part of that. So model results through the years have informed listing and management decisions for the CBM. It will also be used in updated management plans in the future, in coming years. In general, provides a framework for prioritizing both state and federal research and monitoring, and prioritizing key threats for management. Another example is estimates of distribution risk analysis are useful to managers for planning as well as evaluation of management actions. All right. I'd like to thank the CBM co-authors. I was way down this list. Mike Rhymes was the lead. And I'd like to thank our funding sources and those who gave me help, and thank the organizers of this conference, and thank you.
So I forgot to mention that we drafted Jeff at the last minute to fill the start-off speaker role, and so I'm so grateful you were able to come on short notice and present this really great talk. Do we have any presentation-related questions? Oh, you guys are committed to getting us back on time. All right, so we'll transition to Mike, and Jim is up next. And I'll say that Jim is also going to talk about manatees, and so any overlap in these presentations is utterly